You know, folks, as we think about Holy Week, I think it's an unchanging fact of life that hardships, they have a way of revealing the real level of our commitment to just about anything. And I think this is especially true when we think about our faith. When everything's going well and there are no challenges, it's pretty easy to serve God. But when things get tough and we're faced with those hardships, well, that becomes the crucial moment when the real level of our commitment is revealed. And we have to decide, am I going to remain faithful in the hard times, or am I going to turn tail and run? And you can be certain that if a flaw, if a chink in the armor exists in our commitment to Jesus, then life's trials will bring that defect up to the surface. And really, this is true in about any area of our life. For instance, you may say, I'm committed to my spouse or to a friend or to my church, but what if problems arise in your relationships and they put your commitment to the test? Yeah, we make those vows, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poor, in sickness and health, till death do us part. It's sort of like that old Fats Domino song. How many of you remember Fats Domino? Remember his song, I'm Walking? What are you going to do when the well runs dry? Are you going to run away and hide? Right? Yeah, what if being faithful, what if it requires you to stick by someone when they start losing their marbles? They get dementia or Alzheimer's, or they come down with this long and this slow cancer. And it requires this 24-hour care for months or for years. Well, I didn't sign up for that, preacher. No, not me. Yeah, when the going gets tough, will the so-called tough bail out? Will they start walking? And it happens all the time in marriages and friendships and in churches. Will you tuck your tail and will you run when the going gets tough? Well, that's what today's lesson from 2 Timothy, I think, is all about. You see, somewhere along the line, back in those early days of the church, lots of folks, they started defecting from the faith because hard times had come. And staying faithful to Jesus, it meant that you might face some persecution or beatings or imprisonment or even death. And sure, before all these persecutions began, that church there in Ephesus, she was growing like a weed. But now she was shrinking like a violet as these newly arrived adversities exposed the real levels of people's faith. So in the midst of these trying times, the Apostle Paul, he writes to his young spiritual protege in the ministry, young Pastor Timothy, overseeing that church at Ephesus, about the attitude that was going to be essential if you were going to survive in these difficult times. And although Paul was making a statement here, I think he was also asking a very important question today. Isn't it true that anyone competing as an athlete will only receive the victor's crown if they compete according to the rules? I like how the old King James translates this passage. If a man striveth after masteries, will he not be crowned except he strive lawfully? Gotta love the old King James. Folks, seeing as how we are now in week number 8 at the end of this Olympiad series, you pretty well know the drill by now. I mean, think of it this way. This will be the last time that you'll ever have to hear that gall darn Olympic music ever again. At least I hope. We're not going to get to hear it again? I caught him by surprise. Just gets you right there, doesn't it? 8 times, I know. Well, folks, in today's lesson from 2 Timothy, Paul shares with us 3 metaphors in a row. As he shares these with Timothy, he pictures a soldier first, then last he pictures a farmer. But in between, he pictures an athlete. And as you recall from the King James I just read, the word for strive, or the word for athlete, it was the Greek word athlesis. This word described a person involved in a sort of top-level athletic competition. This athlete was a serious contender in their sport. They were totally committed to the goal of climbing to the top of their profession. In fact, they were willing to go any kind of hardship, any training, any regimen, any kind of discipline in order to reach the goal of becoming the best in their field. So the word athlesis, it describes a sort of full-time competitor, a professional athlete. And in fact, as time went by, this word athlesis, it even went on to express the idea of any event in life that sort of demanded one's blood and sweat and tears. It indicated exertion, effort, total commitment. Well, just as in our world today, where we have amateur athletes and professional athletes, so it was the case in the world of which Paul wrote this letter. If someone was an amateur, then that meant that they were not a serious contender. They were not able to participate in the most strenuous competitions. However, if you were a professional athlete, it was understood that you were so committed that you were ready to compete no matter how intense the competition, no matter how brutal the circumstances. Well, folks, you might remember back a few weeks ago during the Winter Olympics that maybe one of the most enduring images for us as Americans was the scene after Shaun White, the snowboarder with the formerly long red hair, won his 3rd gold medal in the Olympics. And as you recall, we watched this red-headed wunderkind sort of grow up before our very eyes over the last couple of decades, as he kind of moved from being this boy who liked to play games to a man, from an amateur to a professional. You might remember his first 2 Olympics. He won with such ease. The world was his oyster. He could do no wrong. He was the golden boy. But then 4 years ago at the Sochi Games in Japan, he didn't even medal. Was this going to be the way his career was going to end, as a failure? Well, you recall, he could have said, I've got 2 gold medals, I've got all the fame, I've got all of the money I could ever want. I mean, what more do I have to prove? Let's just hang up the board. And yet something in him said, no, this is not the way I want to go out. So he decided to train hard and to come back as the old man of the sport, competing against all these young whippersnappers, these high-flying young kids, and compete in one last Olympics. And then several months before the Olympics, over in a competition in Australia, he proceeds to take this supreme faceplant. And he's in a hospital. And he's badly injured. Yeah, why continue to put yourself through such risk and punishment? Why not just retire? And he almost did. But he didn't. He chose to remain committed to the path that he had set out on, even in the hardest of times. And as a result, when he won that third gold medal there in South Korea, you saw a whole different Shaun White. There was weeping. There was transparency. There was this man who went through the path of fire in order to be able to find his way back to that circle of victory. And it took everything to get there. It was obvious that there was an indescribable price to achieving the victor's crown. But it was all worth it. And friends, this is sort of the image that I see that Paul is conveying when he speaks to Timothy. You know, about overcoming the challenges that Timothy's facing as this young pastor. Paul is asking Timothy, so are you just sort of this amateur weekend warrior who's just following Jesus for fun? Or have you really committed yourself to go all the way to the finish, regardless of the difficulties? Are you serving the Lord only because it's popular and enjoyable for the moments? Or are you the kind of serious athlete who's willing to pay any price and undergo any kind of hardship so as to win the prize? Timothy, are you really committed? And folks, these are the honest kind of questions we have to ask ourselves if we want to determine our level of commitment. Because, yeah, it's all wonderful to be a big fan of Jesus and come to church every Sunday and to praise the Lord, right? That's easy. But what if it becomes difficult to hold true? When things get tough, will you still be stalwart and faithful? Or will you turn tail and run and take your toys elsewhere? You see, it's the spiritual fights in life that always reveal the genuine level of our commitment. Because basically, if you're not committed, you won't make it to the finish line. But if you do, Paul says there's a crown waiting for you. Let's remember this Paul. At the end of this letter that he writes to Timothy, he's there in this prison cell in Rome. And he says to him, I'm being poured out as a drink offering. And soon the time of my departure will come. But I have fought the good fight. I've run the race. I've kept the faith. And so in the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. And you know that word for crown, it's the Greek word Stephanos. And in the ancient Greek Olympics, it meant the victor's crown. Now understand, it was essentially just a wreath of leaves placed on a winner's head, and as far as value goes, it wasn't worth much. But what it did represent, folks, it was worth the struggle. You see, an athlete who walked away with the Stephanos, the victor's crown, would be literally honored for the rest of their life. Sort of like Michael Jordan in Chicago. MJ could probably walk into any bar in Chicago and never have to pay for a beer for the rest of his life, right? Sorry to mention that. The memory of his achievement, it will be etched in Chicago lore forever, ensuring that Michael will never be forgotten. And the same is true, Paul is saying, for us, who run in such a way so as to win the prize. Paul is saying that if you are a serious contender when it comes to doing the will of God, if you don't allow any obstacles to stop you, no matter what challenges or obstacles the devil throws in your path, then you'll walk away with the respect and the honor of others at the end of the race. They will see the authenticity of your faith, that it was genuine, that it was proven, that it stood up under the fires of testing, that yours wasn't some kind of a fickle faith that tucked tail and ran when the going got tough. You stuck it out. You showed who you really are, and as a result, folks will never forget how you held true to your commitment. And friends, isn't that how we tend to stand in awe of some people who stay faithful to their friends, even in the hard times, who kept their commitment to their spouse, even when it wasn't easy, who remained faithful to their church, even when times got tough, who stuck by their principles, and they refused to cave to the pressures that sought to break them down. Let's face it, people who fit into such categories are becoming rare and rare these days. And yet are they not the champions of that faith hall of fame? They're the examples of what we all should strive to become. Because although they had to endure a lot, as a result they now stand as heroes, victors to those who watch them run. And yeah, the crown that they will receive in this life is that special place of honor that has been etched in other people's minds and hearts who saw how they ran. They weren't just along for the ride until it cost them something. And folks, I want you to pay special attention to what could be considered a throwaway word in today's passage. It's the word anyone. Paul once again says, anyone who competes as an athlete does not receive the victor's crown except by competing according to the rules. Well, this is the Greek word tis. The idea it represents is anyone at all, which tells us two important things. First, that anyone can compete in the race of faith. So 2 Timothy 2:5 is meant for anyone, tis. But secondly, it also tells us that anyone who desires to be successful as a competitor, you had better pay special attention to the proper preparation and the training that is required to make yourself a winner. Because Paul even says that such a one will not win the victor's crown unless they compete according to the rules. And folks, Paul isn't talking here about the rules of the race. He's talking about the rules of training and preparation that a professional athlete went through before the race began. Paul is saying that we should never even attempt to enter those real spiritual arenas of the faith until we've gone through the necessary preparations to win. If we go into that spiritual arena without preparation, then we better be ready to undergo some recuperating because we're probably going to get a beat down. This is serious stuff. Winners are those who have trained and sacrificed and prepared. Maybe you remember Malcolm Gladwell's 2008 best-selling book. It was called Outliers. And he said 10,000 hours is the magic number, the rule of greatness. So in studies of anyone who becomes great at anything, they can expect to put in a lot of training, shooting those baskets or playing that piano or perfecting that surgical technique. 10,000 hours or more to be an outlier. And sure, then as now, athletic scouts. They would go out into the communities of ancient Greece to look over all these young hopefuls, and after finding a promising athlete, that scout, they would issue that young athlete an invitation to a training camp. And at that camp, these athletes were introduced to these trainers who were skilled at competition. And then the trainers, they would put these kids through these incredibly rigorous routines to build up their minds and their bodies for the battles ahead. And folks, Timothy knew all about the manner in which the professional athletes of his day were training. This was common knowledge. Therefore, Paul's statement about competing according to the rules, it didn't require a rocket surgeon for Timothy to be able to figure out what Paul was talking about here. So rather than whine or moan about how hard it was to serve God in my situation there in Ephesus with all of the trials as the pastor, it was time for Timothy to man up and to put his big boy pants on. That if he was going to be a serious contender in the race of faith, a professional, and not an amateur, a faithful Christ follower and not some fickle fan, that he needed to see all these trials as opportunities to exercise his faith muscles, so that under the most strenuous of circumstances, he could strengthen himself to better handle the greater tasks that still lay ahead. And therefore, rather than let his current circumstances just sort of pass by without them benefiting him, he needed to view his present trials as an opportunity to train, to prepare for the future. After all, if he could pass this test, then he could pass any test. So let me ask you, friend, what test are you undergoing right now? What is it? What is this time of hardship revealing about your own level of commitment? Are you committed as you thought you were? Or maybe have you discovered that you're a lot softer and flabbier spiritually than you realized? In fact, rather than just sort of coast along through life in that soft condition, don't you think it's about time for you to look at your life and the trials that maybe you're undergoing as an opportunity to grow stronger for the race that lies ahead? Well, you know, we enter into Holy Week, and this is Palm Sunday. And let me ask you, does anyone here know what a tableau is? A few. Well, a tableau is like a moment frozen in time. Artists throughout the ages, they've provided such powerful image. For instance, the Last Supper this week is a tableau, an image forever frozen in time of Jesus' last earthly night on this earth before he dies. Well, in our last few moments together, I'd like for us to witness a number of brief Holy Week tableaus that have everything to do with what we've been talking about today. And we have with us today some special guests, Ellie and Derek, who are going to help us witness these enduring images. So as our first image moves now into place, let's hear from the book of Hebrews, chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, and scorning its shame, so that he could sit down at the right hand of God the Father. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. For in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Kind of makes me think of that old country song from George Jones. Remember George Jones? He said, "You've got to run to win the race. Go along the way and quick the pace. So remember when your worried faith has fallen down that you got to bear a cross if you want to wear a crown." So our first image is of Jesus, the faithful, the finisher, the victor, the one who has run the race for us, the one that we are to fix our eyes on as we run, as we suffer. Move. And then, seeing as how it is Palm Sunday, we witness a second scene now. Move. And before our eyes, we move from Jesus the faithful now to the fickle. It's Palm Sunday, and we see the jubilation, we see the elation on the faces of the Palm Sunday worshipers as they welcome Jesus into Jerusalem today, this Sunday. But we know that just 5 scant days from now, some of those same so-called fans and followers will be the very ones that will be crying out Jesus' name. Crucify! Pilate said, "I have here Barabbas and I have here Jesus. Who should I set free? Barabbas. What about Jesus? Crucify him!" We witness the fickle move. And then, in yet another scene, we meet up with a man who Luke says that one of the 12 move, called Judas Iscariot. He went to the chief priests and he asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" And so they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver, and from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. So the deal was made, and shortly thereafter, the night came, and there in the upper room, Jesus said, "The one who dips his hand with me in the bowl, he will betray me. Judas, whatever you got to do, go and do it quickly." And so we witness here in the garden, Judas leads a cadre of soldiers. Jesus has been praying. Judas is about to betray Jesus with a kiss. And as Paul told the Galatians, he said, "You were running such a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth?" Judas had been one of the 12. And yet now he betrays the master. Move. And one final scene. We meet up with Peter. And there in the upper room that night, move. Peter was with the master when Judas betrayed the master. Peter said, "I will not deny you. I will go with you to the end. I'll go with you to prison or whatever." And Jesus said, Tonight, Peter, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Luke reads that when they seized Jesus and led him away and took him into the house of the high priest, Peter followed at a distance. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, that Peter sat down with them, and a servant girl, she saw him seated there in the firelight, and she looked closely at him, and she said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. We know that twice more that night that Peter would deny the Lord until finally, as the cock crowed, Jesus was being led out, and Peter and Jesus' eyes met. And Luke says that Peter went outside and he wept bitterly. Move. So Ellie and Derek have helped us to see 4 images frozen in time of the fickle and the faithful amidst the Holy Week story to prepare us for our journey that lies ahead. I'd like for us to put our hands together and to thank them for the wonderful job that they have done. And as we have done throughout our weeks amidst this journey, our Olympiad series, in your bulletins you'll find a prayer on the back that we've been praying every week, and you can pray this prayer throughout the week, but it kind of summarizes what we've been talking about today. Would you pray this prayer with me? Lord, I don't just want to be a fickle fan, 1 minute cheering your name and the next bailing out when the going gets tough. No, I want to seriously contend for the faith. I choose to put away amateurish attitudes and behaviors. For me to become all you want me to be, I realize that it's going to require more of me. I'm sorry I've so often chosen the easy path, and I'm recommitting myself to enter into spiritual training. I've decided to compete according to the rules so that my life will truly count in the arena of faith. Help me to become all you intend me to be by making the necessary attitude changes so I can become a victor in the faith race set before me. Amen.